So next we have Kyle Polich from the Data Skeptic, or from Data Skeptic, the podcast, and he's going to tell us, I'm really curious to know about this Missing411, all these people going missing. I'm really scared. Please make me more scared.
All right, let's get into it then. So quick show of hands while we get the slides up, just for my reference. How many of you have heard of Missing411? Okay, good spot half. 10 years ago or so, I listened to about equal parts skeptical podcasts and woo podcasts, just to dabble a little bit. And this idea of the Missing411 kept coming up. It sounded like, hey, maybe this is going nowhere, but has really kind of embedded itself into that wooey subculture kind of thing. We got my slides coming, or should I just go?
Is it on the PC or is it
on the Mac with the HDMI?
Are you lit up?
There we go.
Thank you.
All right, and so over the last decade plus, it's grown into quite its own little thing. And it's 11 books and 3 documentaries, and I'll give you a sense of what the Missing411 is. So this is a quote from the first book that the author, David Paulides, put out circa 2011. This is how he described Missing411. There is a series of missing people inside our national parks. The events were very unusual, and the Park Service were doing everything possible to keep a lid on the publicity. So some sort of conspiracy. What was kind of interesting to me is that it's plausible a serial killer could operate in national parks. I don't know why, but that's a real world thing that could happen. Probably a place you could grab someone and not be noticed. It's not a lot of space to get off trails and things like that. That has since grown quite a bit in the years preceding. So that's David Paulides, really the kind of, what would you call him? Like the, who's the Star Wars guy? George Lucas? He's kind of the George Lucas of Missing411. You'll find a lot of people kind of like do their own fanfic about it or tie in their own cases. And it's grown. It's not just national parks anymore. He describes it now as more of a series of unexplained disappearances that fit a pattern. For some reason, they're all still in North America. Maybe he's just not well-traveled enough, or he needs new material for the books. And he always talks about how there are clusters of cases, and these clusters defy conventional expectations. So clustering is actually what kind of got me interested in it at first. I'll have a slide later about that. It turns out he's just kind of drawing circles around maps, as best I can tell. So a bit of background on David. He's a former police officer and I don't know if you've become a former Bigfoot researcher. He doesn't do a lot about it, but that's where he started. This was his first book, Tribal Bigfoot. Wouldn't recommend it. And he's appeared many times on Coast to Coast and other paranormal outlets just promoting this idea. So what is the Missing411 pattern? There's probably more bullets I could have added, but these are the big ones you hear coming up again and again. Obviously, someone has gone missing. That's the main prerequisite, true of all these cases. The victims are sometimes found at distance and or an elevation that defies common sense. Canines can't pick up the scent, and the bodies are often found in areas previously searched. Very strange.
Very weird.
Now we get into some of the more optional ones. Often people will go missing when there are sudden weather changes. Okay. People have, those who are found, because not everyone in Missing411 is actually missing, a lot of them are found, they seem to have no memory of where they were. Often they're found near a body of water or a boulder.
Yeah, I see him.
Yeah. Clothing is often removed, typically pants or shoes or boots. And actually, the first time I presented this, somebody gave me a key insight here. There's something called paradoxical undressing, that if you get really bad hypothermia, there comes a point near the end where you actually feel warm. And you're like, I'm hot, let me take the sweater off. And then, it's going to obviously escalate the hypothermia. So interesting real-world medical condition that can tie into this. And then there are often children's screams heard before their disappearances, sometimes.
They're psychic.
Yeah. So, there's a couple other bullets, but these are the high ones of what fit the pattern. So if you qualify for at least one of these, I guess, you can be part of the Missing411. This is a term I invented that no one else seems to want to use, but I call it pseudo-woo. It's because really what David does is he creates the, just asking questions sort of thing. He doesn't really say, oh, it's because of the government or it's because of UFOs. Actually, he kind of does say that a little bit. We'll get to it. But he's sort of created the USB stick of conspiracies where you can kind of plug in whatever theory you have. Maybe it's, psychic stuff. Maybe it's Bigfoot. But David has done a really diligent job trying to never give a definition of why they're disappearing, just that it's mysterious, and they are. So 11 books, 3 movies. These are the 11 books. He starts out categorizing regions, and I'll get into some of my favorites. And now, the last couple of years, he's been focusing on individual states after going through a bunch of these. So one of my favorite cover, I guess, just a really nice graphic design here. Is from Law, which is not law like you'd think. It is land, air, and water. And this covers disappearances from, presumably trained emergency responders and people like that. Why are they going missing if they're these experts in the field? And also, it gets into like the real conspiracy zone where David has some beefs to pick with the National Park Service. In this book, he talks about how government records are mysteriously difficult to obtain. In fact, he was filing a lot of FOIAs for a while, and at some point, the National Park Service said, this is going to cost about $30,000 for us to do all this research you want. And to him, that was just aghast. How could they charge me $30,000? And, well, because probably someone has to spend 6 months tracing down a lot of this stuff. Yeah. Another one of my favorites, A Sobering Coincidence. The book examines cases where young men vanished near bodies of water. Something's missing here. Oh yeah, often after a heavy night of drinking, only to be found deceased in the water under mysterious conditions.
What? No way.
And then Off the Grid. People who were, like the I don't want to be part of society types. I've got my own self-sufficient little ranch set up somewhere. Sometimes they go missing. Very strange. And this is the book that catalogs those. Then into the documentaries. This is the first one, came out in 2017. It really covers 2 main cases. If you want this is just kind of a sad documentary. It documents 2 cases of very young people who go missing, and David's kind of gotten involved with those families to promote the fact that they went missing and maybe be looking for clues. There was a search, at least in Jared Atadero's case, where it wasn't found for a while, and then years later they found his jawbone and parts of his clothing, so probably a sad predation event. So this was kind of like almost a Grief Vampire kind of documentary. Second one, 2 years later, is Missing411, The Hunted, where we focus on these very experienced hunters who are survivalists and great in the woods and all that. One happened to be 82 years old, but he was, in the prime of his physical form. He was a real good outdoorsman guy. Then Aaron Hedges, similar story. And then this film puts forward near the end a possible cryptozoological explanation. Wow. There's a mysterious sound that was heard and a light flashed before someone disappeared. And so, hey, USB stick conspiracy. Maybe it's Bigfoot or cryptozoological origins. Then we get into probably my personal favorite of the documentaries, Missing411, The UFO Connection, which the title kind of speaks for itself. Many of you may already know the story of Fred Valentich, kind of comes up a lot in skeptical circles. A guy who, as best I think the sort of mainstream theory says, is that he got twisted around and was like upside down in his plane. A maybe not very experienced pilot got confused, saw lights above him he couldn't explain. Neither him nor the plane was ever recovered.
That's Australian?
That's an Australian guy, yeah. And then Zygmunt Adamski, I don't think any connection to George Adamski, Polish-born miner. He vanished 5 days later. He was found atop a coal pile with mysterious burns and ointment on his neck. Definitely weird, definitely strange, I agree. I don't know that it's UFO connected, but there you have it. So what the heck is this Missing411? As best you can kind of tell, it's people go missing. This is my take on it. People go missing from wilderness areas, in particular national parks, at least at the origin of this. Some of them are never found, some of them are. The National Park Service might be hiding something. Maybe it's cryptid, maybe it's UFOs, maybe it's both. And, I'm just asking questions, or as they say, jacking off. So I took the first book and I said, let me dissect this one, get some data I can really look at. I picked out 5 cases randomly, just sort of took a random number generator, gave me 5 different pages, and said, I'm going to go deep on these cases to do some verification, see if maybe there is anything to it.
So this was the Bechdel test?
No, unrelated to Bechdel again, yeah. Not the movie thing with the Bechdel test. This is just Amy Bechdel, disappeared near Shoshone National Forest in Lancaster, Wyoming. Car was found abandoned. Years later, her watch was located in a riverbed. And what David didn't disclose in the book is that the police named 2 different suspects in this case. So a very human story, presumably. Second one. Oh yeah, I love this part too. Anne Wagner also went missing from the same area in 2005. Quote from the book. Both their names started with an A, and their first names only had 3 letters. Like a Batman villain going and getting the 3-letter killer, you know? Get on to Carl Landers, a 69-year-old guy who disappeared climbing Mount Shasta with 70-mile-per-hour winds. Very mysterious. Also, this is one of those other points where David really gets me. It's sometimes worth reading the fine details. According to local legends, beings called Lemurians lived underneath Mount Shasta. So maybe the Lemurians got Carl. I don't know. Daniel Dinky disappeared in Oregon. It's reported as 29, he's actually 39. Those are the kind of like, whatever, mistakes David makes. He's not a liar in the books. He's cataloging actual events, but makes minor insignificant errors sometimes. And then law enforcement officials have said that they believe foul play was involved. Also in the book, also making it kind of a sort of banal but sad event. 4th out of 5 I checked. Wyatt Cole Little Light. He was 1-year-old. His parents scatter remains found. What did I mean by that? I think they found his remains somewhere, as memory serves. There was a car that was broken down. Sorry, this is coming back to me now. The parents began walking during the snowstorm. One was lost. The police said the parents were struggling with addiction problems, and then the small child disappeared. So, very sad story, not necessarily mysterious. And then just to summarize, in that first book, 19 cases, 3 of the people not actually missing, found alive at ages 2, 2, and 6. 3 were found dead from seemingly unshocking causes, and 13 were never found. So that's just a breakdown of the cases, at least in the early days. And then the age and year, which he gives for all of them. Here's my distribution. You have a fair amount of young, some old, and probably just due to the fact that records keep getting better, we have a lot more, or maybe because the conspiracy's ramping up, we get a lot more in recent times. And then, those were 5 I picked randomly from the book. Let's zoom in on a few that are maybe more salacious or something like that. Stephen Kobaki. This is a guy who is about to publish a book, so he's very cagey about what his actual story is. He'll do interviews where he only talks about how he's not going to talk about it. Basically, his skis and backpack were found abandoned by a lake, and footprints led to the lake, and no footprints came back. So it was assumed a suicide or a death or whatever you call it. But 15 months later, he's found in Massachusetts. Claims he has no memory of the 15 months he was gone for. Claims he doesn't know where he got the clothing he was wearing at the time. And waiting on his book to hear that fun story. Gabriel Nagy, and I actually think this one's probably true at face value. This is, again, an Australian case. Father of 2 vanishes in '89. His burned out car was discovered. That's a little weird. He was found 23 years later living under a different identity, and says he had a severe head injury and some amnesia and that sort of thing, and he actually reunited with his family. I don't know him, couldn't judge all this, but when I've looked into it, this one seems like maybe a genuine case of amnesia, especially with the reuniting. What doesn't seem so much like a case of amnesia is Jody Roberts here. This is back in the 80s. She was a reporter, disappeared, and was found 12 years later living in Sitka, Alaska, not as Jane Doe, but as Jane D. Claims to have no recollection of her previous life or the marriage she may have been wanting to escape. It's also worth noting that before disappearing, she emptied her bank account and took her cats to the Humane Society. So, interesting case. Casey Hathaway, maybe you heard this one. This was on the news. Casey disappeared in 2019, was missing for 3 days, and at a point where maybe you'd give up. It was quite cold out in January at the place where he was at. Found alive, told people that a bear kept him company and kept him warm, which I don't know, plausible. That's what AI thinks it might have looked like. And as soon as he got back and was obviously talking to police and stuff like that, his main request was, I want to go watch Netflix. So I think Casey's okay, despite the traumatic experience. He's also now part of the Missing 411. Here's another one of my favorite quotes. The fact that berries and berry bushes play a common role in many disappearances is quite intriguing. I don't know why, but that's what David thinks. And back to the clustering, I threw this in just to give some data to it. So this is actually what got me first interested. I thought there would be something neat to say about clustering. It's a common set of algorithms we use in computer science and data science. On the rows here, we have different data sets. So like here's kind of the two bullseyes. And then the columns show you how different algorithmic approaches would divide those up. So this second from the bottom row, I would say every algorithm does a good job of where we would intuitively say something clusters. But then look at like the skewed one, and you can see where some algorithms do a bad job, at least to what I would intuitively think should be the result. So there is not necessarily one best clustering algorithm. Turns out clustering wasn't so helpful in this investigation because ultimately you get something like this when you try and do clusters. In case you can't tell, these are the same image. And it's not actual data, I just wrote the two captions assuming they would fit, and they're probably true. That in general, when you do these heat maps or look for clusters of things, you find that it clusters pretty much exactly with population centers. So a few good Politis quotes before we wrap up. News services sometimes temper the story or don't ask specific questions with regard to the scene. Okay, maybe they don't. It would be incorrect to state that the NPS has not cooperated with my efforts, but in some cases they were very evasive. So yeah, those guys are out to maybe be a cover-up, and I believe the National Park Service do have the data, and that the data they possess would shock the average American citizen. Now, as much as this sounds like a whiny guy who just didn't like that his FOIA request got denied, I think there's something maybe not sinister, but truthful to this point, that perhaps the National Park Service does not have the best record keeping or archives, or is even federated in a way where, from one park to the next, they know what crimes were committed. I actually talked to some people from National Park Service who described it more or less as more of a collection of groups than some hierarchy. So there are no standards. It's not like how every Starbucks is on the same computer system. It's a lot of volunteers and a lot of sort of salt of the earth people just trying to do a good job. Even David thinks that. He's definitely for the rangers, they're good people. It's the administrators that are the real shady people, of course, right? The big boss man. So, some non-mysterious reasons that people go missing. Went off the trail, fell and became immobilized. A sad but easy to happen thing. One can drown while swimming, especially in rapids or things that aren't meant to be swam in. Of course, exposure to the elements, one of the big parts of the pattern being that weather change has happened, maybe catches a person out there without the right equipment or clothing. Of course, some missing persons cases are probably murders and kidnappings. I don't know what percentage, but that is a thing that happens and would fit this pattern quite well. I also think it's very likely people are trying to disappear or escape or go missing on purpose, and maybe leaving your car at a national park is a way of making it seem like you fell to predation or something like that. Bear attacks are a real thing, and heart attacks and other health crises can happen unexpectedly, and if you're off by yourself somewhere, I mean, if you have a heart attack in a McDonald's, you're not going missing. Everyone knows what's going to happen, or any major city, really, but if you're off on a hiking trip, that could be a way where you go missing that stays mysterious. So what's the harm in all this? We ask that question a lot in skeptical circles. Psychics, I think there's a lot of harm. There's a lot of financial manipulation and things like that, and people being told obviously not true things. There's a maybe lesser extent to that. I think some of this, there's some grief vampire aspects to it where David and this whole idea will embroil a family. Nothing at the level of like what happened with the Sandy Hook families, very unfortunate situations there. but a lot of people have opted in to saying, yes, my loved one is a missing person, and it's strange and mysterious and unusual, and let's keep talking about them, keep focused on it, and I think that plays a role here that's potentially harmful. It also, even though the National Park Service element has declined, there's a lot of fingers pointed at this organization, which I don't think is necessarily bad, and it could divert people from visiting our national treasures. So harmful things, not the worst, not like some of the alternative medicine stuff, but perhaps some harm in this. And then my thoughts, having looked at this now for over a decade. By the way, I was trying to get a missing person on a milk carton, and
That
AI
is
could
great.
not do it. This is the closest it would
That
come
is
to.
great. I love that.
So missing people do exist, often for banal reasons, sometimes for possibly criminal reasons. Almost none of them are connected, at least in my opinion. David seems to see a connection everywhere in all this, but other than cataloging them, I don't see the connection. And my last real conclusion is that you spend 15 years cataloging these, putting out 11 books and 3 documentaries, and you've kind of got a small publishing business. So that's one outcome, I think, is why this has been perpetuated. You'll find it still carries on, and there's sort of a name here in the same way. If I say street epistemology, you say
David,
Anthony Megabosco.
Yeah. Well,
And anytime you hear about anybody missing, it seems to be that a lot of like the Woo podcasts will instantly jump in and say, oh, it's like that missing 411 with David Polites. So people go missing. It's always a sad situation, but there doesn't seem to be any real conspiracy here, despite lots of documented cases. So I'll keep following it, but that's my report on the missing 411.
Thank you so much, Kyle. And we're getting closer to back on schedule, but we still want to take a break. Any burning questions for? Oh, well, we got lots of burning questions. Okay, well, let's keep them quick. We'll do a couple. Susan, you...
I just wanted a better definition of the word pseudo-woo.
Oh, so it's
Microphone.
pseudo-woo. I'll give you. Oh, thank you. I had that formal definition slide, but I closed up. My thought on pseudo-woo is where you're kind of giving the milieu of mysteriousness without pinning something to it. Like, I'm not saying it's aliens, I'm not saying it's Bigfoot, but something weird is going on.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, real quick, why do you think the people who get upset about it being, pointed out that this could just be some natural thing, why do you think they get so upset about that?
Yeah, people do get pretty upset with my criticism of it.
Yeah.
It's hard to say because it seems like a low-rent conspiracy. Like you criticize someone's religion, you're kind of attacking something at their core in a way, that's fundamental to your life. I think it's because if you are bought into it, these are sad situations we want to put a light on. If there's a missing, like Amber Alerts are a great thing. Let's let people know, look for this car. There's a missing child who shouldn't be missing. And if there were a group saying, stop doing Amber Alerts, I would be against that group. We should have those. And I think maybe there's some of the core truth between those two ideas is why people get so upset.
Armin.
I didn't see you mention it, but does he mention in the books anything about how many of this might be mental health issues of the person missing?
You're right. That's I did not have a bullet for possible mental health issues. I think that's probably plays a role. Mental health is a surprising thing. I had a friend who kind of just snapped one day and was a different person for a mental health issue. It was the first time I was close to anything like that. And if he had wandered off into the desert and been found, that wouldn't have surprised me because he wasn't acting in his right mind. Polites doesn't comment on that. If anything, I think he may shy away from it because, well, I shouldn't speculate why. If I was in his role, I would shy away from it because it's such a clear answer and one that maybe you don't want to pull into the missing 411 group because it's feels predatory in a weird way. But yeah, it's not a big part of the discussion around it.
I couldn't help but think toward the end that all the recent firings of the national parks are not helping things at all either.
I bet not, yeah.
Jim.
Is there a smiley face thing? Have you heard of this? I thought the guys who got drunk and drowned, that there was a claim that there was often a smiley face sticker near where they were found.
Ooh, I don't know about the smiley face sticker. That's interesting. I'll have to look into that.
And also the missing shoes. if they're trying to cross a stream or something, they would take their shoes off, and that would accelerate hypothermia as well.
Yeah, also a good path to accelerate hypothermia if you take off your shoes across the stream for sure.
All right, well, let's get into our break period. Do not go missing in that break. But